Chapter 21. All for One. Okay, I hate to be the one to say it, but I'm just gonna come right out and ask, Yamada said. Is there a possibility that Todoroki was taken because the League thought he had one for all? Nezu shook his head. They shouldn't have. That's why we went on with the sports festival like we did, despite All Might's death. All of the students' quirks were on display, and none of them were very similar to All Might's at all. That being said, Tsukachi said, we are fairly confident that All for One is behind the League of Villains. The existence of the Nomus confirms that much. So, what are we supposed to do? Midnight asked. We can't just leave him alone, not if he's going to go after our students. Do we even have a choice? Snipe asked. If All for One is really as strong as All Might was at his prime, then how are we supposed to counter that? If his quirk is what makes him so strong, Aizawa said darkly, then we'll just have to take it away. The teachers looked at each other and nodded. They would take down this villain, no matter how strong he was. They owed it to Todoroki. Shoto sat unbound at the bar, watching with a mixture of amusement and horror as Dabi tried to hit the increasingly enraged Shigaraki with peanuts. Toga was sitting next to him, cheering on Dabi as one of Twice's personalities did the same, and the other pleaded for him to stop. Kurogiri simply shook his head fondly and continued cleaning glasses. Already there was more love and camaraderie in this group than Shoto had ever felt at home, and he wasn't quite sure how to deal with that. So, Todoroki, I see you made the right decision. Shoto looked up in shock to see a smiling Midoriya sitting in the window. Midoriya, what are you doing here? Toga almost knocked him over as she ran past him and threw her arms around Midoriya, who hugged her back without hesitation. Mind-chan, you're back! Mastermind, Kurogiri said. It's a pleasure, as always. May I get you a drink? Shoto's eyes widened. Midoriya was Mastermind? He looked over to see Midoriya shaking his head. I'm afraid not. I'm here on business this time, not pleasure. Then get to the point, Shigaraki grumbled. Midoriya had finally untangled himself from Toga's arms, and he sighed. I just thought that you guys might like to know that the heroes and police are gathering outside. It looks like they're planning a raid to come rescue Todoroki. He looked at Shoto and gave him a knowing smile. Too bad they're a little late for that, huh? Shigaraki scratched his neck. Annoying heroes! How did they find us, those cheaters? Now, Tomura. Shoto flinched as an unfamiliar voice came from the television. It does not matter how they knew where to find you. All that matters now is that Mastermind was kind enough to tell us of their plans. How long do you think we have before they strike? Midoriya shrugged. An hour at the most. If I were them, I'd likely use the planned press conference as cover. Might I suggest retreating? Kurogiri said calmly. We have other properties that the heroes will not have discovered, and Mastermind has given us more than enough time to clear out this location. Shigaraki stopped scratching. I guess you're right, Kurogiri. Come on, guys, grab your stuff and let's go. Kurogiri was already busy warping away his vast stores of alcohol as many of the others left to go pack. Shoto himself didn't have anything to do, seeing as they didn't bother to grab any of his things when they'd kidnapped him. He turned his attention to Midoriya, who was wearing what he recognized as Mastermind's villain costume, but with the hood and mask down. Are you a member of the League? Midoriya laughed and shook his head. No, I've found I work best if I don't tie myself down to any one group, but I've done a few jobs for the League now, and I like working with you guys. Shoto started as Midoriya referred to him as part of the League. When he'd agreed to become a villain with his brother, joining the League hadn't really been on his mind, but he supposed that was what he had done, wasn't it? It was weird, being referred to as a part of a group, like he'd finally found a place to belong. He shook his head. But you showed up in person for the USJ attack. Why go that far if you weren't a member? Midoriya's face soured. Killing All Might was personal. Shoto waited for him to continue, but it appeared he'd said all he was going to say on that subject, so Shoto asked another question. Then why are you helping us now? From what the news has said about Mastermind, you mostly wait for people to hire you, but you don't care what they get up to when they aren't consulting with you. Midoriya smiled softly. I see a lot of myself in you, Todoroki. I was abused for years by the person who was supposed to be my hero, while the people who were supposed to protect me turned a blind eye. No one ever saved me, not because they couldn't, but because no one ever wanted to. Ever since I turned to villainy, I've been happier than I ever was before, and I want the same thing for you. I couldn't just let you go back to living in hell, not when I had the power to get you out. Shoto found himself blushing. No one had ever cared about his happiness before. Certainly not his father. And yet, here Midoriya was, acting like Shoto's happiness was important enough to work for. Even back at the sports festival, before Shoto even considered becoming a villain, Midoriya was there, letting him know that he was more than his father's abuse. Todoroki, are you okay? Midoriya was looking at him with concern. Shoto, he replied before he could help himself, and he blushed a little more. I don't want to go by my father's name anymore. Izuku smiled and nodded his head in understanding, blushing a little himself. All right, Shoto. You can call me Izuku if you want. Aizawa crouched on the rooftop halfway between the two raid locations. Vlad King and Principal Nezu had just started the press conference, which meant that it was almost go time. Aizawa was just grateful that his quirk was part of the plan, so he didn't have to deal with the vultures. He couldn't imagine the disaster it would have been if the villains had taken another student, say, Bakugo. Aizawa shuddered. If they'd taken Bakugo, the school would have been blamed for broadcasting his violent behavior, and UA would be in a lot of trouble. As it was, the blame was resting solely on the villains for now, but a press conference was still deemed necessary for this big of an incident. A voice came over his earpiece. The Nomu factory has been secured. Thank you, Best Genist, Tsukachi's voice said. You and your team keep an eye out. The villains might try to recover them. Aizawa sighed. One down, one to go. If he had to guess where All for One would show face, he would bet on the bar, since that's where they were keeping Todoroki and where most of the villains were located. That meant that the most difficult part of the mission was still to come. Pizza delivery! Ed Shot called out, and then nodded to Gang Orca, who used a sonic attack to knock down the wall. Kamui Woods ran in after him, ready for his first major battle since he'd been injured by Mastermind months ago. All clear. What? Ed Shot unlocked the door and walked in. Where are they? The heroes looked around the room for a moment before seeing a yellow post-it note stuck to the corner. They crowded closer to read it. Just missed us. We have a problem. Aizawa frowned at Ed Shot's voice. They're not here. What do you mean they're not there? Endeavor growled. He had been sent to the Nomu factory since his fire was one of the few things that could harm a Nomu, and they were concerned this whole thing might really just be an elaborate trap for the #1 hero. I mean, the only sign anyone was ever here was a post-it note saying, just missed us, with a winky face. He obviously knew we were coming. Aizawa ignored Endeavor's frustrated rant. If the villains weren't at the bar, then where were they? And how would they get Todoroki back? Suddenly, the radio went silent, and there was an explosion in the distance. Genist, come in! What the hell is going on over there? Aizawa held his breath, but there wasn't an answer. Aizawa, go help them! Aizawa ran as fast as he could to the Nomu factory and almost jumped off a roof before he realized that the building that was supposed to be there wasn't anymore. I don't need your quirk, a voice was saying. It wouldn't pair well with Tomura's disposition. A grunt, and Aizawa looked down to see Best Genus's eyes glazed over as the man in the black mask punched a hole through his gut. Endeavor was just starting to stand back up with rage in his eyes, while Tiger had been knocked unconscious by the blow. Tsukachi, Aizawa whispered into his radio. I have eyes on All for One. My apologies, heroes, All for One said, but I simply cannot allow you to take these Nomu. They are essential to young Tomer's success. "Surrender, villain," Endeavor declared. "You have nowhere to run." All for One chuckled. "If I wanted to run, you wouldn't be able to stop me." Endeavor shot off a wave of fire at him, but All for One simply stepped aside and let the flames pass by him harmlessly. Endeavor growled. "Flash fire fist! Jet burn!" He used both hands to create a massive wave of flames. "Air cannon plus spring-like limbs," All for One said calmly as a massive wave of wind blew the flames off course, sending them flying towards a bank of apartments that was engulfed within moments. Screams sounded from the apartment, and Aizawa swore. "Tsukachi, get Backdraft or someone over here. I can't intervene yet, not if we want to capture this bastard." "I already called him," Tsukachi said. "Wait for backup and stick to the plan." All for One and Endeavor kept fighting, neither landing a hit on the other, but increasing collateral damage with every attack. "Flame tornado!" Endeavor yelled, jumping into the air and using his flames to propel him forward as he spun towards the villain. "Air cannon plus spring-like limbs, kinetic booster times 4, strength enhancer times 3. He seemed almost bored as his attack flung Endeavor straight through a nearby building. Already weakened from the fire, they started collapsing almost immediately. It was only by using his fire to melt through the rock that Endeavor had managed to survive. He wasn't going to last much longer if this kept up. "Is everyone in position?" Aizawa whispered impatiently, and almost sighed with relief when a chorus of affirmatives came over the radio. Aizawa took off his goggles and set them on the roof. Power Loader had made him a special version of his hero costume just for this fight. It looked mostly like his standard one, except it was made to withstand the heat of Endeavor's flame, and had a hood and mask that he pulled up to protect his hair and face. Finally, he put on his new goggles, still painted gold, but this time fully enclosed with a mirror effect. A temperature regulator wrapped around his chest, and he turned it on, shivering at the artificial cold. After he finished adjusting his new suit, Aizawa took a deep breath and jumped off the building, landing in a roll. All for One and Endeavor were still exchanging blows as Aizawa crept closer. Despite the fact that he was in full view, All for One didn't seem to notice him, which was when Aizawa took note that his mask didn't have any eye holes. He must be using some sort of infrared vision to see, which made Aizawa almost invisible in the flames. All the better. The fight shifted, and Endeavor caught sight of him, nodding silently and retreating a few steps to put some distance between himself and All for One. Aizawa ran to stand in between the two fighters so that he could see All for One but not Endeavor. He activated his quirk. "Now! Prominence burn!" A massive beam of fire shot past him, quickly turning from orange to blue, and Aizawa started sweating as the temperature regulator in his suit struggled to keep up. He held up his quirk for as long as he could, but he had to blink eventually. "Midnight!" He yelled above the noise of the flames, and Endeavor stopped his attack. Midnight quickly ran out from behind a building and cranked her quirk up to full force, shrouding the area in a purple mist. Aizawa heard Endeavor fall to the ground behind him as he saw All for One collapse in front of him, heavily burned but not dead. As the gas took hold and the police surrounded the area, Aizawa finally closed his eyes. Chapter 22. Threat. "So, let me get this straight," Izuku said tersely. "You want me to join your little Yakuza, rather than leave me in a consulting role, as was the agreement when I showed up here?" Overhaul simply looked unimpressed. "You've done impressive things in your short career," he said, scratching at his wrist. "But with the recent defeat of All for One, villains will be looking for a leader to fill that vacuum of power. Your actions strike fear into people's hearts, but you have no vision, no plan for society beyond making a quick buck. I have a plan, and a vision of the world without the infection of quirks. A vision you no doubt agree with, being quirkless yourself if the rumors are true." He clenched his fist. "Put yourself under me, and I will show you how well I can use you." "I think you deliberately misunderstand me, Overhaul." Izuku grit his teeth. I have no intention to join any group, nor do I particularly care about what happens to society, as you put it. I'm not even trying to be the leader of the underground. I'm more than happy to let you or Shigaraki or whoever the hell else has the desire for the throne take it. What I value is having the freedom and power to do whatever I want. Whenever I want to, and sometimes that means working with rival groups. So joining any organization would be counterproductive to my goals. He leaned forward. And as for the issue of quirks, do not presume that you know what I want. Quirks are tools, nothing more, nothing less. I don't hate them or see them as an infection that needs to be eradicated, unlike you. What I do hate, though, are people who act like the world belongs to them simply because they have a powerful quirk. In other words, Overhaul, I hate people like you. Izuku stood up and walked towards the door, fingering his throwing knives and getting out of range of Overhaul's quirk. So no, I will not be joining your Yakuza, and this meeting is over. Chronostatus tried to follow Mastermind as he left without being dismissed, but Overhaul simply held up a hand. Don't worry, Chrono. I have ways to convince him. He glared at the door where Mastermind had disappeared. Find out everything you can about Mastermind. He will be my disciple soon enough. Inko walked home, carrying a bag of groceries in each hand. Normally she wouldn't go to the store so late, but they were out of milk and she'd had a late shift at work, so here she was, walking back to an apartment an hour after dark. Hopefully Izuku would be home by the time she got there. He'd been spending a lot more time out with his friends lately, which made her really happy, even though she hadn't met any of them yet. Lately, he'd even been texting a boy named Shoto constantly, something he'd never even done with Katsuki. Maybe she should ask what Shoto's favorite food was and have Izuku invite him to dinner? Maybe Himiko or Tomura would even join them. It would be nice to finally have faces to put to the names. All she knew about them so far was that Shoto was sweet, Himiko was high energy, and Tomura was a little too into video games. Maybe she should ask Izuku when their birthdays are. They could shop, with the perfect gifts, together, maybe even make a day of it. It would be the perfect excuse to hang out with her son now that he was finally thriving and out of the weird depression that had taken hold of him a few months, almost a year ago. Inko couldn't help but be proud of her son and how he was living his best life because he gave up on that impossible dream. She'd always done her best to discourage him from being a hero because it just wasn't a realistic dream for someone quirkless, and she didn't want him to get disappointed. Above all, Inko just wanted Izuku to be safe, and that included him not trying to face down villains who were so much more powerful than he could ever hope to be. Inko didn't know what she would do if Izuku ever got hurt. After Hisashi's work transferred him shortly after Izuku's 4th birthday and his quirkless diagnosis, her baby was all she had. It was important that he stayed safe. She knew that it had hurt him when he finally came to terms with the fact that his dream was impossible, but at least he got past it, and now look. Izuku had friends now, and he was so much happier than he ever had been while he was still trying to be a hero, and not that Izuku was finally happy, that meant Inko could be too. Suddenly, Inko felt a rough hand on her collar. She cried out and was yanked backward into an alley. She tried to run, but was suddenly hit by a wave of dizziness and nausea, and it was all that she could do to stay on her feet. "Give me your money!" "Okay," she cried, dropping her groceries and taking out her wallet. What with both the darkness and the dizziness, she couldn't see her attackers clearly, but it looked like they all had bird-type mutation quirks. No wonder they'd turned to mugging. It was always difficult for such obvious mutation types to find good jobs. "All right, let's finish this up," a bored-sounding voice said. Inko flinched back as a hand reached for her, but the hand grabbed her anyways, and suddenly she was engulfed in red-hot pain. Inko didn't know how long she was in pain, but when it was over, she briefly realized she'd collapsed at some point and could hear her attacker's footsteps retreating. Once they were gone and she'd recovered a little, she felt around for her purse and grabbed her cell phone, which was miraculously still there. "Hello? Police? Mom?" Izuku cried out as he saw his mom sitting on the back of an ambulance talking to a police officer as the paramedic looked at her. "Mom, what happened?" I'm fine, Izuku, Inko said. The paramedics say I'm better than normal. Even my old root canal somehow fixed itself up. Izuku paused. What happened? He asked lowly. Midoriya, I'm Officer Sansa. Your mother appears to have been mugged, an officer with a cat head said, although we're not sure what their motivations were. All of her cards and cash were still in her wallet. We think they might simply enjoy causing pain, since one of their quirks seems to be causing an immense amount of pain without permanent damage. Izuku was practically vibrating with rage at this point. What did they do to you, Mom? Inko shook her head. One of them just touched me, and everything kind of exploded in pain for a minute or two until everything was fine again, and they left. I'm fine, Izuku. Izuku did not think that the situation was fine by any stretch of the imagination. He didn't care how long it took, he thought, as he started to run his hands through his mother's hair to comfort her. He would track down the thugs that hurt her and make them pay. Midoriya-san, Officer Sansa asked, can you give us any physical descriptions of your attackers? Izuku perked up as Inko shook her head. It was dark, and one of them had a quirk that made me really dizzy. One thing I noticed was that they all had bird mutation quirks, so I assumed they're related. Izuku stilled. Bird mutation types? Or just bird masks? A dizziness quirk? Or a drunkenness quirk? A quirk that caused immense pain? Or a quirk that was able to disassemble and reassemble matter to the point that even a decades-old root canal was suddenly gone to the point that it seemed it had never been there? Izuku wrapped his arms around his mother, and she finally broke down and started to cry. This wasn't a mugging. It was a threat. Be careful. I know what's important to you, and I'm not afraid to kill to get what I want. Izuku's eyes took on an intimidating fire. Overhaul had just made a huge mistake. Chapter 23. Overhaul. It had been a month since Inko's mugging, as the police had called it, and Izuku was finally ready. The day after his mom was attacked, Izuku had pretended to go back to Overhaul with his tail between his legs, but he was really playing the long game, making sure his mother was safe until he was ready to destroy the Yakuza himself. Being part of the Yakuza was interesting, for the lack of a better word. For all that Overhaul bragged about using him to his fullest potential, Izuku had been basically doing glorified busywork every time he was at the compound. He was seen as a new member, and so was at the bottom of the pecking order, a fact which irritated him to no end. He wasn't even allowed to be involved in the real work of the Yakuza. All he knew was Overhaul's glorified rhetoric about a quirkless world, and it was getting really annoying. Shoto had offered to come along and help him get his revenge, but Izuku had respectfully declined. Overhaul had threatened his mother, the only person who had ever given a damn about him before he became a villain. So leaving the job to anyone else would have been supremely unsatisfying, even if that someone was a close friend like Shoto. Izuku pulled his mask up over his mouth and jumped down onto street level, staying in the shadows as he snuck up behind the guards. A few slit throats and a stolen keycard later, he was wandering the silent halls of the upper compound. He knew there were only a few guards on this level, with most of the Yakuza living and working in the labyrinth below, so it didn't take long for Izuku to track down a dozen or so low-ranking members on duty that night and take them out. A simple throwing knife through the eye or a slit throat was quick enough death for most of them. Izuku wasn't about to waste time and energy playing with any of them when he could easily raise the alarm. Besides, these small fry were never anything more than collateral damage in his complete annihilation of Overhaul, and an effective message to anyone else who might get it into their heads that it was a good idea to go after his mother. Izuku had bigger plans for the night. It took him a few minutes to find the secret entrance to the rest of the compound, since he'd never been allowed to find it unaccompanied, but it only slowed him down a little. He kept to the blind spots in the halls, silently killing everyone he came across until he found the barracks. He almost felt bad as he viciously slashed one of the sleeping men's throat, but the feeling didn't last very long. Yeah, none of them had made the call to attack his mother, but they had made it known in the past month exactly how they felt about weak, quirkless people like him. And they were following an idiot psychopath, so there was that. Izuku followed the same pattern as he gradually cleared the compound, picking the lock on every door and killing everyone inside. He hadn't been surprised to find a variety of labs tucked away, but was surprised at how little raw material they had stored. Shouldn't there be a lot more chemicals involved in the production of quirk-erasing drugs? He pocketed a few vials of the quirk eraser that he found in the lab and used them to coat some of his knives before heading towards Overhaul's room. The only other room left, aside from his, was a door that was locked from the outside. Izuku didn't know what was in that room, but whatever it was would still be there when he killed Overhaul and his inner circle. The expendables all stood up when he entered the small guard room he had to go through to get to Overhaul, and he smiled at their shocked expressions as they took in his blood-soaked costume. "Mastermind," Chronostasis said, carefully keeping his voice even. "You're not supposed to be here." "You're right," Izuku smiled. "I'm not." In a flash, Izuku had thrown two of the knives he dipped in the quirk eraser at Setsuno and Sasaki, since their troublesome quirks could affect him directly. He smirked when Setsuno's eyes widened as he tried to steal the knife that Izuku had just grabbed, only to be left gasping for air. "What?" he taunted. "Having trouble with your quirk?" Rappa pounded on his chest. "I'm not, and even if I was, I wouldn't need a quirk to kill the likes of you. You just be sure to give me a good fight first." Izuku simply dodged out of the way of Rappa's quirked punch and attacked the other members. First, he ran towards Tengai, who threw up a barrier to block him, but neglected to remember that Rappa was running after him full speed. Izuku smirked as he dodged at the last minute, subjecting Tengai's barrier to the full force of Rappa's quirk, which broke through it almost immediately, allowing Izuku to step right up behind Tengai and slit his throat. Rappa gave a scream of rage and ran at Izuku again, but he was already on the move, this time towards Hojo, who had already covered his body in crystals. Just like before, Izuku waited until the last minute before dodging and letting Rappa tear through his opponent's defenses before finishing him off. "Enough! He's using you to hurt your own men!" Chronostasis yelled as he extended the hour hand of his hair to hit Rappa, immobilizing him. Izuku didn't waste the opportunity, and Rappa was dead before anyone had the chance to blink. Tabe immediately ran at him, mouth open wide, but Izuku simply shoved the knife down his throat before he even had the chance to bite down. 4 down, 4 to go. 5 if Izuku was counting Chronostasis. Katsukami ran to try to touch Izuku and sap his energy, but Izuku didn't let him get close, dodging while slashing with one of his longer knives and following it up with a throwing knife to the back of the head. "Who will you be going for next?" Nomoto asked. "Doesn't matter much at this point," Izuku answered honestly. He didn't have much of a choice, after all. "Your quirk doesn't help you in combat, and both Setsuno and Sasaki are functionally quirkless right now. I'll beat you all easily." All three rushed him at once, trying to overwhelm him with numbers, but Izuku had analyzed all of their fighting styles extensively over the last month, and he had much more experience fighting quirkless than they did. Chronostasis couldn't hit him without the risk of hitting one of his teammates, a mistake he wasn't about to make again, so the fight didn't last very long. When they were all dead or bleeding out, Izuku finally turned to Chronostasis, who was just staring at him in shock. Izuku smiled and lazily tossed a knife at him, forcing him to dodge. "That's a pretty cool quirk you got there, Chrono." He tossed another knife. "Too bad it's got such a big weakness." Izuku forced Chronostasis to keep moving, which prevented him from using his quirk, all while Izuku gradually moved closer. After a few minutes, Chronostasis was panting and finally stood still, apparently deciding that the benefits of using his quirk outweighed the potential danger. It was the wrong decision. Izuku slashed his throat before Chronostasis even had the chance to extend his hair. Izuku straightened as he heard the door to Overhaul's room open behind him. "What is the meaning of this?" Overhaul looked on his dead underlings, nose crinkling in disgust. "The meaning of this," Izuku said, carefully coating a knife and stolen quirk eraser behind his back, "is that you threatened the wrong person." Overhaul sighed and removed his gloves. "It will be a shame to have to kill someone so uncontaminated," but oh well. He ran at Izuku, who watched him get closer without dodging. At the last moment, he ducked under Overhaul's outstretched arm and sunk the knife into his gut. Overhaul simply let out a grunt, but simply slapped Izuku on the back. Nothing happened. Nice quirk eraser you've developed, isn't it? Izuku taunted as Overhaul's eyes widened. Too bad you haven't practiced being perfect? Wasn't that the word you used to describe people like me? Unlike his men's, Overhaul's death was not quick. Izuku took pleasure in slowly taking the man apart like he'd taken apart his mother, and when he was finally done, Izuku gathered up all the knives he'd used throughout the fight and headed down the hall towards the mysterious locked room. Whatever was inside must have been important if it was so close to Overhaul's own residence, and maybe prone to escape if they'd locked the inside of the room. After picking the lock, Izuku quickly grabbed the knife and shifted into a battle stance. It paid to be prepared for anything. But Izuku was not prepared. He didn't know what he was expecting, but it definitely wasn't a little girl, huddled on the bed staring up at him with wide red eyes. Izuku was suddenly very aware of the fact that he was covered in blood and holding a knife. The little girl seemed very aware of that as well, if the way her wide eyes were tracking his every movement was any indication. Izuku hurriedly put his knife away, putting his hands out in front of him in a belated attempt to be non-threatening. Hey there, I'm not going to hurt you. The girl didn't look like she believed him, but she also didn't start screaming, so Izuku figured that was the best he could have gotten. My name is Mastermind. What's your name? The girl fiddled with her hands in her lap, and now that he'd gotten over the shock of seeing a little girl locked in the middle of a Yakuza compound, he noticed that her arms and legs were covered in dirty bandages, just barely covered in most places by her too thin nightgown. Eri. Her voice was small and hesitant, like Izuku's had been when walking to the teachers in middle school, and he felt his heart break. What was she doing here? Eri, is it okay if I sit next to you? Eri hesitated, but nodded, allowing Izuku to sit on the bed beside her. He pointedly ignored the fact that he was staining the sheets red as he looked her in the eyes. What are you doing here, Eri? Eri trembled for a solid minute before replying. I have to help Overhaul. I'm sick. Izuku tried to ignore his anger. He didn't need Eri getting any more scared than she already was. What do you mean, Eri? What did you have to help Overhaul with? She tugged at the bandages on her arm, and Izuku's eyes widened at the deep lacerations beneath. My sickness makes other people not sick anymore, so Overhaul takes his sickness from my blood so he can put it in people so that they're not sick. Izuku's eyes widened. The quirk eraser he'd stolen was made from Eri's blood. Izuku wanted to march back to Overhaul's body and somehow bring him back to life so that he could torture him to death all over again. What kind of monster tortures a little girl to get his hands on her quirk? Izuku looked at her softly. You don't have to help Overhaul anymore, okay, Eri? Overhaul is gone. Eri looked Izuku up and down, wide eyes taking in the blood, and her lips started to tremble. Izuku panicked, worried he'd said the exact wrong thing. What if Overhaul had somehow convinced Eri that he loved her, and that he had just killed the one person she thought might mean the world to her? Why was he so stupid? Suddenly, Eri's arms wrapped around his waist, and she started sobbing. Thank you, she sniffed quietly, either not noticing or not caring that she was getting blood all over her hair and her nightgown. Izuku awkwardly patted her on the back as he waited for her tears to pass. This poor little girl had been too much already. That brought him to the question of what he was going to do with her. He couldn't just bring her home. His mother and the cops would ask where he'd gotten her, and it could reveal his identity all too quickly if they linked Eri back to Overhaul. Even if that wasn't an issue, Izuku was not ready for the responsibility that would come with raising a traumatized child. He wasn't about to entrust her to another villain group either. They would just use her for her quirk the way Overhaul had. Izuku sighed. There was only one option left. He gently grabbed Eri's shoulder and pushed her back so that he could look her in the eyes. Hey, Eri, are you ready to leave? Eri nodded eagerly, eyes bright with hope, and Izuku knew that if she still knew how to, she'd probably be smiling. Izuku lifted her up so that she was clinging to his back before making his way outside. He wished that he'd left the path cleared of bloodshed, but he hadn't exactly been planning on carrying a 5-year-old on the way out. If anything, he'd at least helped Eri realize that the bodies they passed meant that no one would be coming after her. It was probably a sick sort of comfort, but there was a chance it might make the whole ordeal less traumatizing. The sky was just starting to get brighter as he got closer to sunrise. They had an excellent view as they ran across the rooftop towards Night Eye's agency. Izuku had figured out that Night Eye was investigating Overhaul while gathering his own info on him. The hero didn't know about Eri as far as he knew, but despite his serious appearance, he had a good heart. Hopefully he'd be able to help Eri recover and find a good home that would protect her from anyone who might want to use her. When they reached the roof of the agency, Izuku slowly crouched down and pulled Eri off his back so she was facing him. He cringed at how she looked like she'd just come off the set of a horror movie, covered in blood, but he sighed when he realized that that wasn't too far off from the truth. At least none of the blood was hers. The man who works here is a hero who was investigating Overhaul. Izuku looked her in the eyes. He's going to take good care of you and make sure that no one ever hurts you again. Eri nodded, but hesitated a moment, fiddling with the hem of her blood-stained nightgown. Mastermind-sama? Eri's quiet voice trembled slightly. Why did you save me? Izuku hesitated for a moment before deciding that Eri had already been fed far too many lies in her short life. To be honest, I wasn't trying to save you. Overhaul threatened someone that I care about, and I couldn't let that stand. But I'm glad that I was able to save you, even if it wasn't why I originally killed Overhaul. I know what it's like to have people hurt you just because they can. It's not something I would ever wish on anyone. Eri stared at him with wide eyes. You were hurt too? Izuku nodded and her voice dropped to a whisper. But you're so strong. Even strong people get hurt sometimes, and sometimes the people who hurt them try to make them feel weak. That's what happened to you and me. Izuku smiled and ruffled her hair. We're strong people. It's not our fault that others chose to hurt us. Eri's eyes lit up. I'm strong? She asked in wonder, and Izuku laughed. The strongest. He stood up. I'm happy that I was able to meet you, Eri. Wait a few minutes after I'm gone, then knock on the door and tell them what happened. The heroes here will take good care of you. Eri looked up at him for a long moment before flinging herself over to hug his legs. Thank you so much, Mastermind-sama. Thank you. Izuku smiled and ruffled her hair again. No problem, Eri. Be safe. Eri nodded and let go, waving to him as he got a running start and jumped onto the next roof. He only ran a few roofs away before stopping and crouching down. Eri was still standing on the roof, looking small against the skyline. She waited another 2 minutes before walking over to the door he'd shown her. She hesitated a long moment before pounding hard with both fists. Bubble Girl thought it was much too early to be dealing with anything, especially teenage pranks. And it had to be teenagers, she thought as she trudged up the stairs, coffee in hand. Who else would climb to the top of a roof of a hero agency just to knock on the door? If it was anyone normal, they would just knock on the front door at a much more reasonable hour. She threw open the door, already mentally preparing the rant that she'd give to the hooligans who had dared disturb her this early in the morning, but stopped short when she saw a scared little girl who couldn't be more than 5, with blood smeared all over her. Bubble Girl dropped her coffee. Izuku smiled as he watched one of Night Eye's sidekicks usher Eri inside. The heroes would undoubtedly set up a perimeter to try to track him down, but he should be able to avoid all that if he left right now. He headed back to his base to shower and get dressed to school, sending a text to his mom telling her that he'd gone for an early morning run. Chapter 24. Eri-chan. Is this her? Sukachi looked through the glass at the girl Night Eye had brought in, who said she was named Eri. Officers had already taken samples of the blood covering her, but they hadn't had time to clean her off yet, so most of it had already dried into a dirty brown and was starting to flake. Recovery Girl was already on her way to look after her, since they didn't know if Eri would be safe in a hospital because of her ties to the Yakuza. As soon as Eri had mentioned that Overhaul and all of his men were killed by Mastermind, Night Eye had sent sidekicks and a whole team of police officers to investigate the base, only to find a bloodbath. There hadn't been a single person left alive with the exception of Eri, and Overhaul himself had obviously been tortured to death. Mastermind's signature M carved into his body over 100 times. The police were still in the process of taking pictures of the scene before they could remove the bodies, and they had already set up a perimeter to keep out the media who had flocked to the compound as if they smelled blood. Tsukachi sighed and walked into the interrogation room, Night Eye and Nezu right behind him. He hated that they had to interrogate this little girl who had been obviously through too much in the last 24 hours, but anything that he could find on Mastermind put them one step closer to discovering his identity, which was essential to resolving a high-stakes hostage situation that he had set up. "Hello, Eri." He spoke softly, sitting down across from her and putting his files for both Mastermind and Overhaul down on the table. "My name is Detective Tsukachi. This is Nezu, and you already know Sir Night Eye. Is it alright if we ask you a few questions about how you ended up on Night Eye's roof this morning?" Eri nodded, her wide eyes scanning the room in a clear display of hypervigilance. Seriously, Tsukachi knew that Mastermind was depraved, but traumatizing a child? This was a new low. "Who left you on the roof, Eri?"
He said his name was Mastermind.
"True. What did he look like?"
He was short and, he had pretty green eyes. He smiled a lot too, I think. He had a mask covering his mouth, but, his eyes were smiling."
"True." Tsukachi looked at Nezu and Night Eye, who returned his glance and nodded. It matched what they knew of him, so it probably really was Mastermind, but why would a villain, especially one as powerful as Mastermind, drop a little girl off at a hero agency when he could have just kept her for herself? Or sold her off? "Do you know why Mastermind kidnapped you?" Night Eye asked with a frown, but Eri looked confused.
He, he didn't kidnap me. Mastermind-sama saved me."
"True." Night Eye's eyes widened, and Tsukachi knew that he looked much the same. Nezu seemed to be the one who maintained the most composure in the light of the new revelation. "What did he save you from?"
Overhaul. He was a bad man. He told me I was sick, and that's why he hurt me."
"True." Eri was starting to tremble, and Tsukachi realized that she was more terrified of Overhaul than she was of Mastermind. The child was clearly traumatized, but the question now was who was responsible for that. Nezu hummed. "Do you know why he saved you?" Eri nodded.
Mastermind-sama, he said that he wasn't trying to save me. He'd already killed all of the, bad men by the time he'd found me."
"True." "Did he tell you why he killed Overhaul and his men?" Night Eye asked. Eri frowned.
I think he said,
Eri's frown deepened as she tried to remember.
Mastermind-sama said that Overhaul had, threatened someone close to him. I think he killed them so that he couldn't hurt them anymore."
"True." Tsukachi rapidly scribbled that down in Mastermind's file. Maybe they could find some people who Overhaul had threatened, and it could lead them to Mastermind's identity. It was a thin lead, since Overhaul had undoubtedly threatened a lot of people as a Yakuza boss, but it was more than they'd had in months. "Did Mastermind tell you anything else? Maybe why he decided to leave you with Sir Night Eye?" Eri fisted her hands in her dirty nightgown and bit her lip.
"He said he was like me,"
she whispered. "True." "What do you mean?" Nezu asked patiently. Eri stayed silent for a long moment, and Tsukachi was starting to worry that they'd pushed her too far when she started speaking again.
Mastermind-sama said that, people hurt him too. He said that strong people get hurt sometimes, and he said that I was strong too, just like him.
True. She looked up at them.
Was he telling the truth? Do strong people get hurt sometimes too?
Nezu took her hand and smiled.
Yes, even strong people get hurt sometimes by others. It wasn't your fault that Overhaul hurt you, and it doesn't mean that you're weak. If people were weak simply because others chose to hurt them, I would never have been able to become a hero, because they hurt me too. Ari's eyes brightened, and there was a knock on the door. Is everything all right, dearies?
Recovery Girl poked her head through the door.
I'm here to take a look at the little girl.
Tsukachi nodded. I believe that we've asked all the questions that we had about Mastermind. He turned to face Ari. Although, we'll probably have to ask you more about Overhaul and his operation, but that can wait for another day.
All right then, everybody out.
Recovery Girl said sternly as Ari started to shake and she rapped Tsukachi on their head with the cane.
I need to check on the patient, and you are all going to make her claustrophobic. Out.
They quickly complied, leaving Recovery Girl to comfort Ari and examine any injuries that she might have. As soon as they were outside, they stopped and looked at each other.
Mastermind was most likely a victim of abuse as a child,
Nezu said. If not at the hands of his parents, then likely at the hands of his teachers or of his peers. The abuse might explain why he goes after heroes, since he likely wished that the heroes would save him, but they never did. Tsukachi nodded. I'll run a list of domestic violence survivors with green eyes. That'll at least give us a start, since it's the most likely the violence happened at home. And then we can expand the search if that doesn't turn up any leads. Make sure you cross-reference that list with anyone with connections to the Yakuza, Night Eye said. Mastermind only got involved with this because Overhaul threatened someone, which means he does have people he cared about. Whether they know his identity is still up in the air. Nezu clapped his hands together.
Perfect. I do believe we are closer to catching this monster now than ever before.
Tsukachi tried to rub the budding headache out of his forehead. This case was terrible. Nothing for months, and then their best leads come from an unlucky little girl. He needed a break. Hey, Nezu, how's the search for Todoroki coming? Nezu frowned and shook his head. Not well. The League has practically disappeared since we took down All for One, and there are no leads on any of the members. I hate thinking that one of my best students has been held captive for this long. He shivered slightly. But the alternative is worse. At this point, we're having to confront the possibility that Todoroki may be dead. With Shigaraki's disintegration quirk to dispose of the body, we would never even know. Tsukachi sighed. Do you have any leads on why he was taken? Has Endeavor received any ransom demands? Nezu shook his head. We still think that it's most likely that that's why he was taken, but perhaps they are waiting for things to calm down a bit before they enact the second part of their plan. He sighed. Endeavor isn't helping the investigation either. He simply blames us for letting his son get kidnapped and not being able to find him. He doesn't seem to care that we have 0 leads, and he puts everyone on edge, always hanging around and saying hateful things whenever he's at UA. Having a student kidnapped is a nightmare scenario, and something that I hoped I'd never have to see when I became principal, but it's even worse that the victim is so high profile. How are the students dealing with it? Night Eye asked. Not very well. Nezu frowned. We have every member of Class 1A meeting with Hound Dog weekly, but they still feel Todoroki's absence sharply. I believe they've started mourning him. The last time I checked, they had set up a small memorial on his desk. They changed the flowers every few days. Other than that, they have been adjusting well to the dorm system, and there haven't been any more major incidents, so it's going about as well as we can hope for. It'll take time, Night Eye said, sadly. Hopefully we can find him soon. If what we just learned today leads us to Mastermind, perhaps he'll be able to lead us to the League. Tsukachi nodded absently. He couldn't let himself get his hopes up they would find All Might's killer, not when Mastermind was so slippery. Who knows? Todoroki had a strong quirk, so maybe he would be able to escape and find his way back to them. But Eri's words echoed in his head as he said goodbye to Night-Eye and Nezu and sat down to do paperwork on the Overhaul massacre. Even strong people get hurt sometimes. Chapter 25. Home. Izuku and Shoto were busy making katsudan in the kitchen of the apartment that acted as Mastermind's base, while Toga and Twice chattered away on the couch and Dabi glared at them from the armchair.
And then he had the audacity to look surprised when I stabbed him.
Toga smiled wildly, showing off her fangs. That makes sense. You're lying! Twice was wearing his mask inside, but no one really minded since it made him more comfortable. Izuku had a theory that breaking his arm might help Twice realize that he was real and not a clone, but that really wasn't something he was comfortable bringing up with Twice, even if they could be tentatively called friends. Toga nodded seriously.
Yeah, it was such a cute expression too, all wide-eyed and bloody. Oh, it's a shame it didn't last longer.
Dabi groaned and threw a pillow at them. Ugh, just shut up already. Just because you decided to be best friends does not mean the rest of us want to be subjected to your crazy bullshit. Be nice, Dabi. Izuku wiped his hands on a towel as he walked from the kitchen. I, for one, am very happy that Himiko has finally found someone to spend time with that's as crazy as she is.
Aw, mine-chan.
Himiko jumped up and threw her arms around him.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
Izuku laughed as Dabi rolled his eyes. Go ahead and laugh, Midoriya. It's not like you have to live with them. Shoto came up behind Izuku and raised an eyebrow at his brother. I'm pretty sure you're just jealous because there's no one as crazy as you. That's it! Dabi jumped up and grabbed a seat cushion from his chair and ran at Shoto, whose eyes widened as he dodged Dabi and grabbed a pillow from the waiting Twice. 10 out of 10! Hit him harder, you're so weak! Twice cheered.
Go, Shoto! Go, Dabi! Be nice, you two! Stop fighting!
Himiko and Izuku were holding their sides, laughing as Shoto and Dabi chased each other around the apartment. From what Shoto had said in their text conversations, Izuku had gathered that Endeavor hadn't really let either of them play around the kids, instead insisting that they train constantly while isolating them from their other siblings and from kids their own age. Once the rest of the league had discovered this fact, they'd taken it upon themselves to introduce the two to everything that they missed out on during their childhoods, resulting in them being the second and third most immature members of the league. First place, of course, still went to Shigaraki. Izuku ducked back into the kitchen and checked on the food.
Alright, you two, come down and set the table. The food's ready.
Dabi reluctantly put his cushion down, and Shoto looked like he was about to do the same, but at the last minute, hit Dabi in the face while he was unarmed. Hey, you little boys, Izuku said warningly. Shoto stuck his tongue out at Dabi before tossing the pillow down on the couch and walking towards the kitchen. Himiko handed Dabi a stack of plates before turning to fix Shoto's hair, which had gotten disheveled during the pillow fight. He'd cut it shortly after joining the league, and it was now an undercut, which he usually wore up in a pompadour style. The way that he styled it made the white and red swirl together, while remaining mostly distinct. The first time Izuku had seen it was when he'd gone over to the league's new hideout, about 3 weeks after the move, and he'd promptly had to leave until he'd gotten his blush under control. Himiko still hadn't let him live that down. Dinner at his mother's house was always a quiet affair, just the two of them, but dinner with friends was loud. Between Toga's laughter, Dabi's sarcasm, Twice's multiple personalities, and Shoto's conspiracy theories, it couldn't be called dinner so much as controlled chaos. But Izuku wouldn't have it any other way. I'm telling you, Shoto pointed his chopsticks at Dabi, there is an extra-governmental group constantly watching our every move through Feel Good Incorporated satellites. Dabi sighed and took another bite. Why in the world would a multi-billion-dollar tech company sell out to a secret organization? Maybe they were promised power, Shoto suggested. But they already have power, and they already have money, Izuku said. What could this hypothetical secret organization possibly have to offer that would convince a respectable company to do something so illegal? Respectable? As if, Twice said. I've never heard of a better company. Ooh,
Toga pounded on the table and her fists lined up. What if it's not just Feel Good Inc.? What if there's all sorts of big companies helping them and it's like the latest fashion trend for the rich? Those don't make sense either, and some of them should be illegal. Shoto looked at Toga, awestruck, while Dabi groaned. Toga, don't encourage him. I like the way you think. A small smile stole across Shoto's face, and Izuku felt his heart skip a beat. He took another too-hot bite. Maybe he'd be able to pass off this blush as coming from the heat. By the end of dinner, the theory had somehow grown to include a worldwide conspiracy that aliens were worshipped by ancient Egyptians. Toga, along with Izuku and both of Twice's personalities, thought it was hilarious, and Dabi looked exhausted. He looked at Shoto incredulously as he finished wrapping up a convincing argument that Officer Sansa from the police department was actually an ancient cat god in disguise, and thus the reason that aliens had chosen Japan as their home base. How are we even related? Shoto smiled and shrugged, gathering up the dirty dishes and heading over to the sink. Toga volunteered to dry since she was finding Shoto's theories too entertaining to stop. The others put away the leftovers and went to go watch the news. Toga, can I ask you a question? Shoto asked as he handed her a plate. Toga hummed. Does it have to do with whether or not I'm an ancient cat god too? Shoto chuckled, a reaction that was becoming more natural the longer he was out from under his father's thumb. No, but we should come back to that another day. He busied himself with scrubbing the pan, trying to work out exactly what he wanted to say. Why have you been spending so much time with Twice? Toga thought for a minute. I guess I didn't really think about it. We're best friends and I feel really comfortable around him, so yeah. Well, that and... She shrugged. Like Mind-chan said, it takes a special kind of crazy to want to spend time with me. Twice and I have that in common, so it feels like we've gotten really close because of it. She shrugged again. I don't know. Why? Do you have your eye on someone you want to spend a lot of time with? Shoto took his left hand out of the water so that he wouldn't accidentally boil it. No, why would you think that? Toga cackled. Yeah, sure, Shoto. You're just bringing up romance for no reason. She winked at him. If it's any consolation, I think he likes you too. I don't have any idea what you're talking about. He denied, but he knew that it wasn't very convincing, considering the fact that his face was bright red. Toga laughed. Sure you don't. Himiko, we need to leave. Twice came in and hugged her from behind. We have plenty of time. There's always tomorrow. Toga gasped in excitement. Oh yeah, I saw this super cute boy earlier I wanted to kill. Come on, Jin, let's hurry. She grabbed his hand and dragged him out of the door, giving Izuku a quick hug on her way out. Shoto finished up the dishes and then joined Izuku and Dabi, who were sitting at the table, wiping his hands nervously on the rag as he sat down. Even though he and Dabi had spent weeks discussing this, and Shoto was sure that it was what he wanted to do, it was still nerve-wracking. Dabi looked at him and raised his eyebrows, asking for silent confirmation. When Shoto nodded, he turned to Izuku. Midoriya, we actually wanted to talk business for a bit, if that would be okay. Izuku looked a bit surprised, but nodded, leaning forward in his seat. What's up? Shoto took a deep breath. There was no going back. How much would you charge us for a plan to kill Endeavor? Izuku hummed and nodded. I was wondering when you two would ask. Will the rest of League be participating as well, or will it just be the two of you? Just the two of us, if possible, Dabi said. We already cleared it with Shigaraki, since it'll probably be associated with the League whether or not the other members are there, but this is personal, so we want to do it ourselves. I'm sure you can understand that. Izuku nodded again. Yeah, I get it. It was the same for me with Overhaul. He turned to Shoto. It's a pretty big crowd for your debut, Shoto. Are you sure you don't want to start with something smaller? Shoto shook his head. He'd considered it, just starting off with robberies or something until he got used to being a villain, but I want my debut to have an impact. If the first thing I do as a villain is kill my father, then it sends a message, not only to him but to all of Hero Society, that he is the one who drove me to this.
It wouldn't have the same effect if I started off with any other crime. I think a hero student turning villain would have an impact either way, Izuku smiled. But I agree, doing it this way will be the most impactful. He pulled out his notebook and a pencil. I'm proud of you, Shoto. Shoto smiled at the praise. Thank you, Izuku. It means a lot. So? Dabi looked at Izuku. How much is this plan going to cost us? Izuku looked at him like he'd grown a second head. Oh, I wouldn't dream of charging you for this one. What? Shoto couldn't believe his ears. Surely Izuku wouldn't help kill the #1 hero for free. Izuku smiled. You're my friend, Shoto. You deserve payback for what that bastard did to you. He started scribbling down ideas. No, it's too much, Shoto said. At least let us pay you something. Izuku laughed as he shook his head. Nope, just consider it an early birthday present or something. Shoto glared at him. My birthday isn't for months. Izuku shrugged. Well, maybe it's for Dabi's birthday then. His birthday's after mine. I don't care. Izuku looked at him and Dabi as he lost control of his laughter. Seriously, Shoto, it's the least I can do. Shoto pouted, but he knew he wasn't going to be able to change Izuku's mind. Izuku smiled widely as he realized that he'd won. So, have you thought about a villain alias yet? You should probably have that picked out before your debut. Shoto shook his head. Honestly, I hadn't really thought about it. I've just been going by Shoto. No, that just won't do. Izuku shook his head. You need a name that strikes fear into the hearts of your enemies. Think about what you'd want on your wanted poster. Shoto just looked at Izuku confused. Why? Wouldn't any name strike fear into people's hearts if the things I do are things people are afraid of? Izuku groaned and hit his head against the table while Dabi laughed. No, I've got the perfect name for you. Peppermint Boy. Shoto scowled and Izuku raised his head up to reveal a terrifying glint in his eye. No, what about Endeavor? Dabi grinned. Daddy issues. Father killer. Ice princess. Don't I get a say in this? Shoto grumbled. Nope, Izuku and Dabi said in perfect unison, and then Dabi gasped in delight. I've got it! Icy hot! Izuku had tried drinking water, but ended up snorting out of his nose. You two are terrible. Shoto shook his head. We should leave now and just prevent disaster. Besides, Shigaraki doesn't want us home too late. Dabi didn't stop laughing, but stood up and grabbed his coat. See you later, Midoriya. Don't get into too much trouble. Me? Trouble? Izuku said innocently. I would never. Shoto shook his head. Yeah, because you're just a paragon of perfection. Izuku gave him a bright smile that made his heart skip a beat. Obviously. I'll send you to the completed plan within the next week or so, and we can go over it to see if you want to make any changes. And keep thinking about a villain name. All right, I get it, Shoto said. See you later, Izuku. The door shut behind them, and Shoto pulled up his hood to hide his distinctive hair. Beside him, Dabi had already pulled the medical mask over his scars. You know, he must really like you, Dabi said as they started walking. Shoto looked at him in confusion. What? Who? Dabi rolled his eyes. Midoriya. He never gives his plans away for free, and he'd let you call him by his first name. If that isn't love, I don't know what is. Shoto sighed. With our family, I don't think either of us would know love if it bit us in the ass. Dabi shrugged. Fair enough, but still, he must really care about you, even if it's just as a friend. Shoto paused and looked up, back at Izuku's apartment building. I hope you're right. Chapter 26. Endeavor. Endeavor was holding a press conference. He practically growled when yet another reporter had the audacity to question his property damage. Seriously, who cared if a few buildings burned down as long as he put those villain scum where they belonged? He wouldn't even be holding a press conference, but his PR team insisted that it was important to be visible if he wanted to maintain his place as the #1 hero, especially since some idiot wannabe reporter had released his sealed property damage reports yesterday. He was going to find whoever idiot thought that was a good idea and ruin their career, but first, he had a press conference to get through.
Endeavor, what do you have to say about your missing son, Shoto? Are you any closer to finding him?
Endeavor grit his teeth. Of course they were trying to bait him by reminding that his masterpiece was still missing. There have been no leads at this time, but I assure you that I will find Shoto and bring him home. Those villains are going to regret taking my son.
Well, that's a little rude, isn't it, Father? All eyes went to the speaker, and Endeavor's eyes widened as he saw his son walking up behind the mass of reporters, the villain Dobby smirking beside him. If you wanted to talk to me so badly, you could have just asked. No point in making threats if you can't follow through with them. The reporters parted to let Shoto and Dobby through, most scrambling to get out of the way of the known villain, while the braver ones shoved mics in Shoto's face. Both kinds were ignored, as Shoto and Dobby continued moving towards Endeavor, staring at him steadily. Endeavor cursed. He wanted to attack Dobby, but he couldn't risk harming Shoto, not to mention the impact it would have on his ratings if any of these stupid reporters ended up as collateral. Shoto had changed since you last saw him. He'd cut his hair for one, wearing it in some ridiculous style that was popular among the uncultured masses for some reason. Endeavor scowled. He'd have to make sure Shoto grew his hair out again, so he looked dignified and set himself apart from the rabble. He also carried himself with more confidence, which Endeavor would almost be proud of if his masterpiece wasn't walking side by side with the villain without attacking him. Shoto's outfit was frankly ridiculous. It was almost as if he picked it out to match Dobby, but that couldn't be right. His masterpiece would never sink so low. It was probably just some horrific coincidence or something the villains had forced him into. He wore a dark red tank top and black jeans with holes in them. He'd paired the outfit with a billowing navy overcoat similar to Dobby's, except without sleeves, showing off his muscular arms. Another unfortunate choice that Endeavor would have to beat out of him. Shoto felt powerful. He could hear whispers running through the crowd, wondering if he'd escaped and what he was doing with a member of the League. Out of the corner of his eyes, he could see a few horrifying expressions as some of the smarter reporters connected the dots. Good. Endeavor was scowling at them, most likely judging his new aesthetic and fantasizing about a way to beat him out of it. Too bad he'd never get the chance. He could see Endeavor mentally weighing the benefits of flat-out attacking Dobby right then, but Shoto knew his father wouldn't be able to without risking his ever-so-important popularity rating. Endeavor was predictable if nothing else. It was going to make him very easy to kill. Shoto, I give you permission to freeze that villain. Oh, so that's how Endeavor was going to play this, huh? Just give Shoto emergency permission, and then he won't have to worry about his popularity going down, even if there was collateral damage, because what father wouldn't encourage his son to protect himself? Shoto gave his best, innocently confused expression. But, father, why would I attack my own brother? Whispers broke out among the reporters as Shoto glared at Endeavor. Oh, that's right. I don't think you ever told them about Toya, did you? After all, he didn't have the perfect quirk like I did. Shoto spat. He was just another one of our mother's failures. Isn't that what you told us growing up? Hey, Dad. Dobby smiled. Did you miss me? Some of the reporters were already on their phones, trying to figure out if Toya Todoroki really existed. The records wouldn't be too difficult to find. Izuku had made sure of that. Endeavor himself looked like he'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, Shoto supposed he had. It must have been difficult to have the runaway son that you'd written off as dead come back into your life as a villain. By the way, father, I won't be... how did you put it? That's right, coming home anytime soon. In fact, I don't intend to come home at all. He felt a thrill at Endeavor's enraged expression. I'm not just Shoto anymore, Shoto said, tossing his arms out to the side as he stared down his father. I go by Freezerburn now. In unison, both he and Dobby shot fire at Endeavor, who simply scowled and remained unmoved. Some of the smarter reporters started to run away, and Shoto rolled his eyes and froze them in place. Their plan relied on having a captive audience, after all. We can't have that. Dobby sent off a jet of superheated flame out to the side and ignited a trail of gasoline they'd set before the press conference, creating a massive wall of flame around the arena. The reporters started to scream and push against each other as they realized that they were boxed in.
Give up this childish rebellion, Shoto.
Endeavor's voice rose above the sounds of the flames.
I don't know what poisonous lies this man has been feeding you, but I created you to be a hero, not whatever this is. Don't ruin your future.
The media had started to calm down despite the hostage situation and had their cameras trained on Shoto, waiting for his next move. He returned his father's glare. What future? My future as a hero? Or a future as your masterpiece? Endeavor's eyes widened minutely. Either way, it's no great loss. I never asked for either one.
Shoto.
Endeavor growled, but Shoto ignored him, making sure to speak loud enough so that the cameras could hear him. You were the one that forced my mother into a marriage she didn't want just to get your hands on her quirk. You were the one that isolated me from the world the moment my quirk manifested so that others wouldn't get in my way. You were the one that beat me black and blue every day of my childhood and called it training. The only sounds that could be heard were the roar of the flames and the approaching sirens. The media held their breath as they waited to see how Endeavor would respond to the accusations.
Come home, Shoto. You will become a hero.
Shoto sighed and shook his head. If being a hero means being like you, I'd rather be a villain. He looked up at his father. At least I'm being honest about who I really am.
Enough, Shoto.
Endeavor growled.
I will not stand for this.
Then fall. Shoto stomped down with his right foot and sent a river of ice towards the podium his father was standing behind, encasing it in solid ice. Endeavor simply kicked the block, knocking it to the floor where it shattered with an icy crash. He ran at Shoto, but had temporarily forgotten about Dobby, who came at him from behind, barbecuing his back with blue fire. Endeavor turned towards Dobby with contempt.
How did you forget that never worked when you were younger, Toya?
Oh, I'm just warming up, Dobby taunted. Besides, you can't even go all out right now because of these reporters, so you can't hurt me either. Endeavor shot a ball of flame at Dobby, who dodged it to stand beside Shoto in front of the reporters, effectively using them as a shield.
If we're going to fight, let's fight, Endeavor yelled. Only cowards use sausages.
And only cowards beat their kids, so I guess that makes us even, Dobby said. The sirens were getting closer now. They'd probably arrive in under a minute, along with at least a handful of heroes. Dobby and Shoto exchanged a look before turning around and firing into the crowd, superheating the air, but being sure to keep their attacks weak enough that the reporters would only be injured, not killed. The arriving heroes wouldn't be distracted by rescuing corpses, after all. Endeavor tackled Dobby, obviously seeing him as the bigger threat. Shoto rolled his eyes and switched to using his ice. Might as well create a variety of injuries for the heroes to deal with when they arrived. Dobby and Endeavor grappled on the ground for a few moments before the fire trucks arrived and water started falling. A few hoses focused on carving pathways through the wall of flames, allowing some heroes through. They took one look at the 100 or so injured, screaming reporters, and cursed. Let's take this elsewhere, yeah? Dobby smiled. You wouldn't want to get in the way of the rescue efforts, could you? He got up and ran away with Shoto on his heels, letting Endeavor chase after them. Apparently the area of the city they were in had already been evacuated because they didn't run into anyone else. The heroes apparently trusted Endeavor that he could take care of his sons and didn't come to help. Everything was going according to plan. Shoto caught Dobby's eye and headed into an evacuated office building, making it a few floors up before turning around and letting Endeavor catch up to them. Endeavor burst through the door, rage mixing with betrayal in his eyes, which just made Shoto angrier. What right did he have to feel betrayed after what he had done to them?
You're weak, boys.
Endeavor advanced with his flames in both hands.
I thought I raised you better than this.
Oh, Dad, Dobby replied. This is what you raised us for. Endeavor sent a stream of fire at Dobby, who returned with one of his own.
The enclosed space turned into an oven as the flames burned hotter and the heat was unable to escape. Shoto used his right side to cool himself and his brother off, but left Endeavor to overheat. I have indulged you for far too long. Let's finish this, Endeavor said. It's a shame to have to damage my masterpiece, but it's worth it to get you back on track. Flashfire Fist, Prominence Burn! Shoto created a massive dome of ice just in time to shield them from the attack, but it was vaporized almost instantly. The jet of fire ripped through the wall behind them and pushed both him and Dabi out onto the street. Shoto could dimly hear a helicopter recording the fight from above. Dabi, are you okay? Shoto crouched next to his brother, who was kneeling on the ground, and cooled the air around them. I'm fine, Shoto, he grunted, standing up. It's not like I'm not used to it. Surrender, now, Endeavor ordered, jumping down to the street and walking towards them. He was breathing hard, and sweat had soaked through his costume, which was only made worse by the raging fire behind him. Shoto gave Dabi a small smile, who returned it with a grin and created a firewall around the three of them. Seems like you're looking a little worse for wear there, huh, Dad? Dabi taunted. Isn't Prominence Burn one of those special moves that makes you overheat? It doesn't matter, villain. Endeavor kept advancing. This fight won't last for much longer. Are you sure about that? Shoto stood up and frosted over his left side. I can go on for hours. Endeavor scowled and shot another fireball at Shoto, who blocked it with an ice wall. The more you use your fire, Father, the more I can use my ice. You should know that, considering you were the one who wanted this quirk so badly. Endeavor was panting now, but stubbornly kept up his attacks, even letting loose another Prominence Burn, although the second was much weaker than the first had been. Shoto smiled slightly when Endeavor went to take a step, but stumbled, swaying slightly as he regained his balance. Shoto nodded at Dabi, who shot another fireball at Endeavor's back. The heat exhaustion made him slow to dodge, and he cried out as the flames burned him. How do you like that, Dad? Dabi spat. How does it feel to burn as you're forced to overuse your quirk? Endeavor just grunted and shot another attack. Shoto glanced up at the news helicopter, circling above them. They needed to wrap this up before more came for backup. Well, Father. Shoto stared at Endeavor in the eyes when his father whipped around to face him. I'd say goodbye, but really it's more of a good riddance. He slammed his right foot on the ground and sent jagged spears of ice towards his father. Endeavor's eyes widened as he tried to dodge, but between Dabi's flame wall and his own relentless attacks, he had gotten far too hot to continue the fight. A thick icicle hissed as it struck his chest, but as soon as it melted, it was replaced by another, and another, each one penetrating deep into Endeavor's torso. Dabi extinguished his firewall and watched as Shoto's ice stopped melting immediately, instead turned red as it was coated with blood. He went to stand next to Shoto and watched their father's face as his angry expression turned to one of pain, and then faded altogether as the life left his eyes. There was a long moment where everything was silent. Shoto couldn't hear the roar of the fires, or the sound of the helicopter, or the approaching sirens, or even Dabi asking him if he was okay. The only thing he could think about was what he'd just done. Shoto had actually killed that bastard for what he'd done to their family. Suddenly he threw his head back and laughed. As hard as he tried, he couldn't stop it as he ran out of breath and felt his cheeks start to ache as Dabi joined in. He was free. Chapter 27. Reactions. Ashido slammed the doors open and ran into the common room. Ashido! Ida jumped up from his place on the couch. Please, be respectful of school property. Have you seen the news? She leaned down with her hands on her knees as she caught her breath. Does it fucking look like we're watching the news, Pinky? Bakugo rolled his eyes. Turn it on! Channel 5! Kirishima ignored Ida's protests that they should be doing homework instead of watching TV, as he grabbed the remote and switched the channel. Won't be... How did you put it? Ah, that's right. Coming home anytime soon. In fact, I don't intend to come home at all. A chill went through the room, and even Ida shut up as they watched Todoroki stare down Endeavor, a member of the League of Villains, by his side. I go by Freezerburn now.
He can't be implying...
Yaoyorozu glanced towards the others, who were all staring at the TV with horrified disbelief. A short scream from Uraraka drew her gaze back to the TV where Todoroki and Dabi had released fire on Endeavor.
No!
Kirishima shook his head. It's got to be a body double, or they're threatening him with something. Todoroki wouldn't turn villain, he just wouldn't.
How do you know, Ribbit?
Asui said.
None of us were very close to him, and he never really showed a lot of emotion. He could have been considering this for months, and we wouldn't have known.
As much as I hate to agree, Shinso drawled. Sue's right. None of us know him well enough to know if this is real or not.
Well,
Uraraka frowned and clenched her fists at her sides.
Shouldn't we be giving him the benefit of the doubt? I choose to believe he's being forced, and this is all an act. As soon as the other Shiros show up, they'll save him.
Come on, Uraraka. Kaminari gestured wildly to the TV, where the high walls of flames were keeping the reporters in place.
He's holding people hostage. What kind of a hero does that?
As a hero, or my future as your masterpiece. Either way, it's no great loss. Apparently a hero who doesn't see himself as one, Shinso said. The class listened as Todoroki described the abuse he'd suffered, and they felt their hearts sink. It did sound like a realistic motivation if Todoroki really had decided to become a villain.
That can't be true, Kirishima said. He's gotta be lying. I know Endeavor isn't the nicest guy, but child abuse just isn't manly.
They all waited for Endeavor to deny that he had beat Todoroki, and the mood in the room completely crumpled when he didn't even bother. Uraraka burst into tears while Asui and Yaoyorozu hugged her. Bakugo's hand started popping with tiny explosions as he yelled at the television set, and Kaminari accidentally shorted himself out.
The other hero should be showing up soon, right? Jiro asked hesitantly.
Well, yeah, Sato said, but will they be able to do anything? They've taken over 100 hostages.
Is that why Endeavor isn't fighting back? Sero asked.
Normally they'd have Dabi barbecued by now. He probably doesn't want to hurt Todoroki. Doesn't sound like that stopped him in the past, Shinso grumbled. Todoroki ran at Endeavor, trying to catch him in ice while Dabi came in with a sneak attack from behind.
He's...
Ashido couldn't tear her eyes away from the television. Acting like a villain, Bakugo finished. The room exploded in yells when Dabi and Todoroki turned their fire on the hostages, and some of the students jumped to their feet as though they thought they could do anything to stop the fight. The footage had erupted into chaos as the cameramen and reporters were injured, and some of the cameras stopped working due to the heat.
Fucking change the channel! Bakugo yelled. One of these stations has got to have a working camera.
It took a minute of channel surfing until they finally managed to find another station. This one had obviously not been at the press conference, but had shown up for the fight because they were standing outside the police line as flames raged in the background and an entire fleet of ambulances drove by. There do not appear to be any fatal injuries at this time, although, from what we are seeing, almost everyone present was injured. The villains responsible for this attack are Dabi, a known member of the League as Villains, as well as Shoto Todoroki, who is going by the name of Freezerburn. Until recently, Todoroki was assumed missing after he was kidnapped by the League of Villains at a UA training camp over the summer. All previous attempts to have rescued him have ended in failure as well, and I guess we know why. The reporter held his hand to his earpiece for a moment and then nodded. Dabi and Freezerburn fled the scene shortly after opening fire on the hostages. The number 1 hero, Endeavor, is currently in pursuit. We'll now take you out to our chopper for a bird's-eye view.
Well, we currently have eyes on a building that Endeavor has chased the villains into just a few minutes ago. It appears that the fight is taking place inside, and... Oh my god! A massive jet of flame erupted from the side of the building, and Endeavor jumped down onto street level. The camera panned and zoomed in on Dabi and Shoto, both of whom were crouched down in the street looking worse for wear. They stood up slowly and stared down Endeavor, and the students held their breath as they saw Todoroki frost over his left side.
They've got to give up now, right? Kirishima asked. I mean, they're facing Endeavor. They can't win. Endeavor shot a fireball at Todoroki, who blocked it with an ice wall and created an opening for Dabi to attack Endeavor. The students gasped when the attack not only landed, but appeared to hurt Endeavor. I hate to say this, the reporter in the helicopter said, but it looks like Endeavor might need a little help with this one. Where are the other heroes? Are they still on rescue? That's what we're all wondering, Shinso said. That's probably why they attacked the reporters in the first place. Oh my god! The reporter couldn't even bring herself to give any commentary as Todoroki slammed his right foot down and shot knives of ice at Endeavor, who couldn't dodge fast enough. The dorm room went silent, the only sound the reporter's frantic muttering at the scene below her. At first, Endeavor was burning hot enough that the ice melted, but after a few seconds the ice stuck in, and from the angle the helicopter was recording at, they could clearly see massive icicles going in his chest and coming out of his back, coated in blood. Todoroki stood still a long moment after Endeavor went limp, and the class wondered what he was going to do. Would he regret it? Would he turn himself in? Would he just disappear? On screen, Todoroki threw his head back and laughed. He was surrounded by ice and fire and blood, standing in front of the person he had just killed, and he laughed. The class sat frozen as Dabi joined in his laughter and pulled him through a familiar purple portal just moments before the heroes arrived on the scene. They looked at each other in horror, and realization of what just happened set in. That was the first time they'd ever seen him laugh. Tsukachi straightened out his tie and let out a long exhale as he sat down across from the reporter in the most popular newspaper in Japan. Normally, in a situation like this, he'd hold a press conference, but well, most of the nation's top reporters were still in the hospital being treated after yesterday's attack, and the rest were understandably nervous about being targeted. So, a private interview it was. Hello, Detective Tsukachi. The reporter was a pretty woman with blue skin, lavender hair, and perfectly straight teeth that looked vaguely threatening from Tsukachi's point in the hot seat. My name is Shitose Kazuki. Thank you for having me today. Tsukachi nodded. Thank you for coming. I understand the media's hesitance to attend the press conference, considering the situation. You mean how the reporters on scene were viciously targeted by Dabi and Freezerburn during yesterday's attack? She laughed. It's an occupational hazard. If you're chasing the biggest stories, you're always going to be the biggest target. We all knew that when we signed on. Tsukachi was taken slightly aback by her laissez-faire attitude towards the injury of her colleagues, many of whom were undoubtedly her friends as well as rivals. But nothing she said registered a lie, so at least she was honest about her attitudes. Alright, so, let's begin. Kazuki leaned forward eagerly. So, there were a few juicy revelations yesterday, weren't there? What do you have to say on the subject of Dabi's identity? We are unable to confirm or deny Dabi's claims of being a Todoroki at this time, Tsukachi replied calmly. Endeavor did have a son named Toya Todoroki who was reported missing about 5 years ago. Toya did have a fire quirk similar to Dabi's, as well as similar eye color, but the scars make facial recognition impossible. So, there is a possibility that Dabi really is Endeavor's oldest son, but there's no way to know for certain until we obtain a sample of Dabi's DNA. But don't you have a lie detection quirk? Kazuki asked with a gleam in her eye. Surely you can tell if he was telling the truth from the footage. Normally that would be the case, Tsukachi nodded. His words registered true according to my quirk, but there's always the possibility that he's delusional and simply believes that he is Toya Todoroki, in which case he wouldn't be lying, at least from his own perspective. Therefore, we're waiting on genetic testing before we continue to confirm Dabi's identity. Kazuki nodded, satisfied. Alright, next question. Both Dabi and Freezerburn accused Endeavor of abusing them as children, including accusations of him participating in a quirk marriage. Did Endeavor abuse his family? Tsukachi sighed heavily. Unfortunately, according to the evidence we've gathered in the past 24 hours, those accusations do appear to be accurate. We are still in the process of taking official statements from Endeavor's 2 remaining children as well as his wife, but the evidence as well as my quirk indicate that Dabi and Freezerburn were telling the truth. He did not want to give those details to the media. Already there was a huge public outcry against the Hero Commission and the Hero System at large, even without confirmation of Endeavor's abuse. but the fallout would be much worse if they tried to cover it up and it got out anyway. Tsukachi knew that there would be inevitable changes in the hero systems as a result of Endeavor's abuse and Todoroki's turn to villainy, but hopefully they would be able to do enough damage control in the few months that they could curb the worst of it. Kazuki was smiling slightly, and he could see the hunger in her eyes. So, I guess here's the $1,000,000 question. How did a child abuser get to be #1 hero? We are currently running internal investigations of both the police force and the Hero Commission to find the answer to that question, Tsukachi said. That being said, it appears to have been a mixture of bribery and people's willingness to turn a blind eye out of belief that Endeavor could not be guilty of the crimes simply because he was a hero. His violent attitude, which would have been a red flag under other circumstances, was glorified and popularized in the media because we most often saw his violence directed towards taking down villains. It's also important to remember that the hero system ranking is not based on the Hero Commission's data, but on popular opinion polls. We, as well as law enforcement, have to take responsibility for the fact that Endeavor was allowed to remain a hero in spite of his crimes, but society at large is responsible for putting him in the #1 spot. So, Tsukachi, you said that the responsibility lies with both the Hero Commission and with the people who voted for them. Kazuki leaned forward. Do you believe the hero system is broken? I wouldn't go that far, Tsukachi replied, but I can confidently say that reforms are obviously needed if we expect the system to fulfill its responsibility to keep the people of Japan safe. Part of the purpose of our ongoing investigation is to determine what reforms need to happen so that nothing like this happens again. Kazuki smiled. Next question. In the last year and a half, a majority of hero deaths has been linked to Mastermind, most notably the death of the former #1 hero, All Might. Do you believe that Mastermind was behind Endeavor's murder as well? Tsukachi grit his teeth at yet another reminder of his failure. Mastermind has been known to work extensively with the League of Villains, of which Dabi and Freezerburn are members. There was also a lot of moving parts in the operation, and the plan relied on exploiting weaknesses of Endeavor's quirk, both of which are hallmarks of Mastermind's murder plans. So, while we have not recovered any written plans tying Mastermind to Endeavor's murder, it's safe to assume that he was most likely involved. The police and the media have known about Mastermind's existence for quite some time, Kazuki smiled. So why hasn't he been caught yet? This is obviously a serious threat to society, and isn't it the hero's job to eliminate those? Tsukachi clenched his fists. He couldn't let her get to him. We have people working around the clock to uncover Mastermind's identity because we believe that it's the only way we will be able to safely resolve the situation without risking more lives, especially since Mastermind has proven time and time again that he is willing and able to kill both heroes and civilians. However, the same qualities that have allowed him to kill so many top-rated heroes are the ones that make him so difficult to find and catch. He's highly intelligent and extremely careful, but we have heroes working on the case that are able to match him in intelligence. So it's only a matter of time before we catch him. All right, Kazuki said. I believe we're almost out of time, so this will be my last question. In the last 6 months, we've lost 2 #1 heroes to Mastermind, who is beginning to be called the #1 villain in Japan. How do you think this bodes for hero society as a whole, and more specifically, Hawks, who is next in line for the #1 spot? Tsukachi shook his head. I honestly can't say. Both heroes were killed by villains who had a distinct reason to target him, All Might because they were a symbol of peace, and Endeavor because of a personal grudge. Mastermind himself, however, is not purposefully going after #1 heroes, so I don't believe that Hawks is in any more danger now than he was a few months ago. As for society, we will simply have to wait and see. Kazuki nodded and stood. Perfect. Thank you again for this opportunity, Detective. I hope to see you again. Tsukachi gave a strained smile and walked her out. He gave a sigh of relief as she got into the car that was waiting for her at the curb. He never wanted to do that again. He went back and got the Mastermind file out, even though he'd practically memorized it at this point. It had been months since All Might's death, and they were no closer to catching him. Nezu had complained that his fur was beginning to lose its shine because of the stress of the case, but he was the only one capable of getting inside Mastermind's head. Tsukachi shook his head and closed the file. Maybe it was time that he got a little sleep. Chapter 28. What happens next? Shoto adjusted his beanie one more time before entering the train station to make sure that it covered all of his hair. His scar was a bit more difficult, but thankfully in this age of quirk, it wasn't terribly odd to see someone wearing an oversized eye patch. He got a few weird looks, but no gasping or screaming about a member of the League of Villains, so we figured his disguise must be at least somewhat convincing. He picked a random bench within sight of the platform and sat down reading a newspaper. He was all over the front page, but then again, he knew that already. He and Dabi had wanted to make an impact, so he would have been disappointed if they'd failed. Part of him wished that he was like Izuku, though, a faceless villain who could go about daily life without worrying about being arrested. Before long, a student in a UA uniform came and sat down next to him. "Do you really think it's a good idea to be out and about right now?" Monoma scoffed. "You might not be in 1A anymore, but you're still an idiot." Shoto rolled his eyes. Yeah. Class 1B is superior and all that. Spare me your superiority complex. I've got enough of that from Bakugo, thank you very much. What have you got for me? Monoma shrugged. "The school's being careful right now. They're planning the school festival, which my class is totally going to win, by the way. But I'm pretty sure Gentle and Labrava called disrupting that, so the league going as well would probably just get everyone caught. Other than that, I think they've started suspecting there's a traitor, but they'd be idiots if they didn't. But they're looking into the teachers first, so we don't have anything to worry about on that front. How are things at the league? I heard you guys lost Kurogiri. Tough luck there." Shoto groaned. "The new base is too small and we're running low on funds. Pretty sure most of the money used to come from All for One, but the heroes froze a lot of his assets when they arrested him. We were doing fine when Kurogiri was still around since he could just warp money in from literally anywhere, but it's a lot more complicated now. So far we've been robbing some rich-looking houses, but a lot of them are fronts for cults and the like, so they don't have a lot of sellable assets." Monoma looked at him like he was an idiot. "With all the powerhouse quirks you've got, are you telling me you haven't even tried robbing a bank?" Shoto huffed. "We thought about it, but part of the reason we're so big right now is because of the ideals we embody. Those will crumble if we openly turn to petty crime." "Then just go find a bank that does something sketchy, or whose CEO is a racist or something," Monoma said haughtily. "You can say you're only attacking those who go against your ideals or something, but at the end of the day you still have cash. It's a win-win." Shoto thought about that for a moment. "That would probably work, but how would we know which banks to attack?" Monoma stood. "That, my dear Shoto, is above my pay grade. Good luck. Do try not to get caught." Shoto mumbled an affirmative as Monoma hurried off to catch his train. Rob a bank, huh? If they could find the right target, it might even further their cause. He was sure Izuku or Labrava could probably point them in the right direction if they got a cut, and that would give him an excuse to talk to Izuku again. Not that he was trying to find reasons to talk to him. Why would he do that? Either way. He got out his phone and dialed Dabi. He should probably call Shigaraki for something like this, but that guy still got on his nerves. He hadn't been allowed to play video games growing up, so half the time Shigaraki may as well have been speaking in Greek for all that Shoto could understand him. His brother was much easier to talk to. "W didn't get caught." Shoto huffed. "Come on, Dabi. Try to have a little bit of faith in me. I haven't even been recognized." "What, you want me to give you a pat on the back or something for doing your job?" "No," Shoto said. "It's just the copycat gave me an idea on how to get funds, and I need to talk to Izuku about it, so I won't be home for a while." You could have just said he had a date. "It's not, Wait, you've got a date?" Toga had apparently stolen the phone. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't tell you because it's not a date," Shoto growled. His face was turning red, and he was starting to get strange looks. He stood up and started speedwalking out of the train station. Even if they didn't recognize him, he still didn't need an audience to his humiliation via annoying older sibling. "Yeah, sure," Dabi drawled. "It's not a date, just like you don't perk up every time you hear about Mastermind on the news. Gotta hand it to you, Shoto. You sure set your sights high." Shoto groaned. "Shut up, we're just friends." "Sure," Dabi laughed. "Well, be safe, use protection." He then hung up before Shoto could yell at him. Shoto glared at his phone for a moment longer before checking the time and calling Izuku. He should have just gotten home from school, unless he'd let his bullies chase him around today. The phone rang a few times, and Shoto was just about to hang up when Izuku answered. Hiya, Shoto. Sorry it took me so long to answer. I had to lose my daily thugs. Shoto sighed. I don't understand why you still let them bully you, Izuku. You could kill any of them without even breaking a sweat. Izuku laughed. Oh, but that wouldn't be nearly as fun as letting them think they're stronger than me. Besides, it's not like I don't know what I'm doing. It's all part of the plan. Shoto pouted slightly. Fine, have it your way. Still doesn't mean it makes any sense to the rest of us, Mr. Genius. He paused for a moment. Hey, is there any way we can meet up for coffee this afternoon? There was silence on the other end for a long moment. Is this about business, or is the great freezer burn asking me on a date? Shoto knew he was bright red. Business? Izuku didn't respond, and Shoto took a deep breath. But, it can be a date. I mean, if you want it to be. What I'm saying is that if you wanted to see it that way, then, maybe I guess I wouldn't be opposed? Shoto cringed. Well, if Izuku had wanted it to be a date, he certainly wouldn't now. Oh, Shoto, Izuku said finally. You sound so cute when you're nervous. I think my habit of rambling has rubbed off on you, though. Shoto smiled sheepishly, even though he knew Izuku couldn't see it. So, about that coffee. I can make it to the new cafe on Hero Boulevard in 20 minutes. Does that work for you? Shoto looked at where he was. It would only take him about 15 minutes to get there. Yeah, that works. Okay. He could practically hear Izuku's bright smile through the phone. It's a date. And to think, Shoto had finally been starting to regain his original color. Yeah, it's a date. See you soon, Shoto. Izuku hung up, leaving Shoto frozen, listening to the dial tone as he tried to process what just happened. Finally, someone bumped him on the shoulder and yelled at him for just standing in the middle of the sidewalk like an idiot, which jarred him from his thoughts enough to get him moving again. He dialed yet another number as he started walking towards the cafe. Hi, cutie, this is Himiko. He said it was a date. Oh God, what am I supposed to do? Toga squealed. Oh my goodness, everyone! Oh, little Shoto's going on a date. Shoto, you're on speakerphone. Come on, what happened? I need details, now! Slow down, Toga, Dabi groaned. You're gonna make him freeze up. So, Shoto, what happened? I don't even know, Shoto whined. I was just trying to meet up and talk about business, and he asked if I was asking him out. Please tell me you said yes, Twikes exclaimed. Oh, you should have shut him down. I said no. What? Toga yelled. Dabi, kick some sense into your brother. Kick it into him yourself, Dabi grumbled. But seriously, Shoto, you're an idiot. Shoto groaned. Ugh, I know. But then I said that I wouldn't be mad if he thought it was a date. Nice save, Shigaraki said, and everyone was silent for a long moment. What? You guys are being loud. If you didn't want me to be involved, you should have had this conversation somewhere else. Ah, Dusty, Dabi teased. I didn't know you cared about dear Shoto's love life. I don't, Shigaraki denied. And like I said, you guys are just being loud. So, anyway, Shoto said. Then he gave me a time to meet him, and he said it was a date, so that means it's a date, right? Aw, our little Shoto's becoming a man, Himiko squealed. But what am I supposed to do? I'm just gonna ruin this. You're not going to ruin it, Shoto, Dabi said. He asked you out, so he's not just gonna drop out because you're a dork. Gee, thanks. You'll do amazing, Twice yelled. He's gonna hate you. You should stab him, Toga said. Tell him how cute he looks in blood. Do not listen to anything that Toga says, Shigaraki groaned. Play some video games with him. Shoto got more and more overwhelmed as they kept throwing out more and more ridiculous suggestions as to how he could get Izuku to notice him. Enough, Spinner growled. Just be yourself, Shoto. If he didn't like who you were, he wouldn't be asking you on a date. Just go and talk with them like you always do and ignore the rest of these idiots. Good luck." He hung up, and Shoto put the phone away as he tried to calm his breathing. He was pretty close to the cafe now, which wasn't helping his nerves at all. He had to resist the urge to take off the hat and fix his hair. Izuku wasn't going to see that his hair was a mess, but Shoto would get caught if anyone else saw, and then he would not be able to go on his date because he'd too be busy running from the heroes. He took one final deep breath before opening the door to the coffee shop. It was busy, but not terribly so. Izuku waved to him from the front of one of the tables and held out a coffee he'd bought him. "I could have bought my own coffee," Shoto mumbled as he took it. "You didn't have to do that." Izuku laughed. "I wanted to. Besides, this is a date, and I can afford to treat you." Shoto blushed again at the reminder and cleared his throat. "So, how were you today?" "I'm good," Izuku said, softly. I'm sorry if you didn't want this to be, you know." "No!" Shoto winced at how loud he was, but it made Izuku laugh, so it must not have been too bad. I'm happy you said something. I guess I was too nervous." Izuku nodded and sipped his coffee. "It makes sense. With your upbringing, I'd imagine it's hard to openly display any emotion." Shoto nodded, and Izuku gave him a bright smile. "Then I'm glad I said something. So, you wanted to talk shop too, right?" "We don't have to do that today," Shoto said. "I can wait for another day." But Izuku gave him a look. "We're both nervous, Shoto. Business is good for breaking the ice, and since it's something we're both comfortable with. Unless you'd rather sit here and get in a meaningless loop of endless small talk because neither of us have ever been on a date before." "Wait, you've never been on a date before?" Shoto said, shocked. Izuku chuckled widely. "Quirkless, remember? Turns out, not many people want to date the freak of evolution." "I don't think you're a freak." Izuku smiled. "Thanks, Shoto, but it's okay. I get it. I'm not as evolved as the rest of you. Still, I always wish people could see me as more than just a quirkless kid." He took a long drink of his coffee. "And now they do, so it's all good." Shoto nodded and smiled. "I was wondering if you knew any banks with corrupt or abusive CEOs. Our group is a little short on funds right now, but we don't want to do anything that'll go against our ideals. We'd be willing to give you a cut as payment for the info." Izuku hummed. "Well, I think the real question is which banks don't have terrible CEOs at this point. I'll do some digging, though, and I'll see what I can come up with. Will you be wanting a full plan?" Shoto shook his head. "I don't think so. As long as the place isn't super secure, I'm sure my brother and I can handle it. He can melt through most metal, and I can pretty easily keep people from escaping." Izuku nodded. "I'm so proud of you, Shoto. I was scared that you might lose conviction after your father, but you seem to really be coming into your own. You really are amazing." Shoto blushed, but gave a small smile. "I'm not that special, Izuku. I mean, I haven't even accomplished anything compared to what you've done. You're already one of the most powerful people in Japan, and you're only my age. And you're so caring." Shoto trailed off when he realized he'd been rambling and hesitantly looked at Izuku, who was just staring at him like he'd hung the stars. It just means a lot, you know," Shoto said, "that that you were willing to help me out of that house and help me go after what I want. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you." Izuku smiled brightly. "I don't want you to pay me back, Shoto. I want you to be happy. As long as you're living your best life, that's all I need. And that's what you're doing, so it's perfect." Shoto smiled, an action that was becoming easier the longer he was out from underneath his father's thumb. "Thank you for helping me." And Izuku nodded. "So, how are you adjusting to your new life? I can imagine it's probably kind of difficult." Shoto shrugged. "Well, I can't really go anywhere, so there's that, but I couldn't really go anywhere else before either. It's just higher stakes now." Izuku hummed. "That's really not what I meant," he thought for a moment. "You don't have to answer this, if you don't want to, but I know that when you first made this career choice,
I felt really guilty for the first few months. Has that happened to you? His eyes widened. Not that it has to, everyone is different, and there's not really any good or bad, and I'm sorry if I made it seem like Izuku. Shoto interrupted. It's fine. My brother's already kind of talked to me about it, and honestly, I don't really know. I don't really feel guilty for what I did, He deserved it. Even the media deserved it, since they're the ones that put him there. He shrugged. I think the hardest part has been adjusting to the idea of the future. I'm afraid of the day that I'll have to hurt someone who doesn't deserve it, and then what I'll do. What happens if I freeze up? If it comes down to me or them, will I be able to do what I need to do to stay free, Izuku looked at him softly. I understand completely. I mean, maybe not completely, because I never had that moment of truth. Pretty much everything early on, it wasn't a matter of who deserved it as much as of what I was capable of. But maybe that's why I felt so guilty until I embraced my role. He gave a sheepish smile. Sorry, I don't have anything better to tell you. This life is messy, and it always has been, and probably always will be. But at least we get to make our own decisions, right? Shoto smiled and lifted his cup. I'll drink to that. Izuku laughed and raised his own. Yeah, Shoto thought. It might not be the most conventional conversation for a first date, but it suited them just fine. Chapter 29. Closer. Tsukachi was considering quitting. In the last month, not only had villains managed to infiltrate the UA Cultural Festival, but the Todoroki brothers had started robbing banks. Any and every CEO has somehow decided that it's the best course of action to put Tsukachi on speed dial and ask for constant updates on who they were going to hit next. The only link they'd found so far is that the CEOs of the targeted banks were all guilty of crimes, but their crimes ranged from felony tax evasion to sexual harassment. The police had to open investigations on the management of every major bank in Tokyo just to stay ahead of them, which had led to a fair amount of arrests, but so far the actual villains they were looking for stayed elusive. The government was actually looking into changing the laws to prevent corruption in businesses as a result of the whole fiasco, though, so at least there were some positive changes coming out of it. It seemed that wherever Freezerburn went, he sparked major outrage and reform, a detail that the media hadn't been kind enough to miss. In the month since his villain debut, he'd already managed to gain a cult following rivaling Stain, which was even more troublesome because it meant that the League had increased in popularity and support as well. It was a headache, and there was now an entire task force trying to crack down on those selling villain merch, especially since the Todoroki brothers' signature merch trench coats were quickly becoming a trend. It also seemed that the League had somehow acquired another warp quirk that was much less powerful than Kurogiri's warp quirk. But the police had been hoping that Kurogiri's capture had crippled the League more. The giant villain that Kurogiri had been looking for when he was captured hadn't made another appearance, and they didn't have any way of knowing if he'd made contact with the other members of the League villains, though Tsukachi figured it was probably only a matter of time until he did. There had been reports of earthquakes in the area a few days ago, but by the time the hero showed up, there was no one there, just a massive amount of destruction. So they were no closer to capturing that villain either. Tsukachi looked at the clock and then grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Nezu had invited him to lunch, supposedly to discuss the Mastermind case, but he suspected part of it was just Nezu trying to keep him from burning out. He appreciated the thought, but he was pretty sure he'd burned out months ago and was just running on fumes now. Still, it would be nice to eat something besides coffee and instant ramen. He gave his name to the hostess at the restaurant and was led to a booth near the back where Nezu was already waiting. Nezu gave him his signature smile and gestured for him to seat. Hello, Tsukachi. How are you today? Tsukachi sighed. You really don't want to know. Even I don't want to know, and it's my life. Nezu chuckled. Well then, I'm glad that I've given you an excuse to get out of that office at least. How are things at the station? Hectic, Tsukachi said. What with all the bank robberies and the open investigations of corruption in the industry, we could hire an entire other force and still not have enough men. It really makes me miss Toshinori, Nezu nodded. He fulfilled his role as a symbol of peace very well, but That has just made the difference all the more obvious now that he's gone. I wish he were still here. Shukachi frowned at the table. I just feel like he'd know what to do. Even if he didn't, his smile might help everyone feel like the world wasn't crashing down around our ears. Just one more thing that these villains have taken from us. Mastermind, in particular. Nezu sighed. I do have to wonder if he knew what he was doing when he killed the symbol of peace. If there was any way to make a lasting influence on society, that was it. Shukachi shrugged. Have you had any luck with the leads we got from Eri? Nezu's eyes brightened. As a matter of fact, I have. First of all, I believe we've ruled out the possibility of an analysis or an intelligence quirk. Shukachi gaped at him in shock. What? How is that even possible? Nezu smiled. My quirk makes me more intelligent than most humans, not all. It is within the realm of possibility that there might be some humans who are naturally just as smart as I am, regardless of quirk. During Eraserhead's brief interaction with Mastermind before school started, it was reported that Mastermind continued fighting with the same tenacity even after his quirk was erased, which leads me to believe that he does not use his quirk when he fights or when he strategizes. This, combined with the indications we received from Eri that Mastermind was abused, leads me to believe that he most likely has a very weak or undesirable quirk. He met Tsukachi's eyes. There is even the possibility, however slight, that Mastermind might be quirkless. Quirkless, Tsukachi said, in disbelief. How? Nezu shrugged. The quirkless face extreme discrimination. Bullying of quirkless children often goes unreported, and the vast majority commit suicide before they turn 18. If one were intelligent enough, they might have become frustrated and decided to mistreat society in return. I sincerely hope that that is not the case, but we would be wise not to discount the possibility. Tsukachi sighed. Alright, so Mastermind likely has a weak quirk or none at all, which is crazy. What else can you tell me? Well, since he has a weak quirk most likely, Mastermind's short stature is not due to his quirk, Nezu said, which means that we are almost definitely dealing with a teenager. This is only more likely if Mastermind turns out to be quirkless because of the high suicide rate. Tsukachi ran his hands through his hair. You mean we've been being outsmarted by a child at every turn? Nezu was no longer smiling and nodded. That does appear to be the case. I only wish that I could have met him before he turned to villainy. Such a bright mind deserves to be nurtured, and I would have loved to teach him, he sighed. But unfortunately, I have to catch him instead. All right, Tsukachi said, still reeling. Any luck with the overhaul lead? Nezu shook his head. There are still too many possibilities. He threatened a lot of people during his short life, which, though impressive, means we'll have to narrow our search category by other criteria if we want that particular clue to prove useful. Anything else? Tsukachi said. Nope, Nezu chirped. That's everything I know for now. Tsukachi sighed. Well, it's double what we had before. Is it bad that I kind of wish we didn't know? He shook his head. I can't believe that Mastermind is a kid. Seriously, what drives a teenager to kill hundreds of people? I'm sure that it wasn't just one thing, Nezu shrugged. It was most likely a variety of little failings that all added up until he just couldn't take it anymore. But that does raise a very interesting question. Oh? Tsukachi asked. And what is that? Nezu met his eyes with intensity. Are we responsible for creating the very villain that will destroy us? Chapter 30. Hints of what's to come. I was right! Shoto slammed the door open to Izuku's base with zero preamble, and Izuku was off the couch with a knife in his hand before he realized who it was. Oh, it's just you. Izuku put the knife away and sat back down. And what were you right about? His boyfriend looked at him intensely. It's a conspiracy! Another conspiracy? Izuku laughed. Is this the one where Officer Sansa is a cat god?
No. Yes. Maybe. That part hasn't been proved yet.
Shoto took off his hat and ran his fingers through his hair.
I'm talking about the one where a bunch of major companies, including Feelgood Incorporated, are part of a major extra-governmental group that's trying to take over the world.
Izuku raised one eyebrow.
It's not that I don't believe you, Shoto, but what actual evidence do you have?
Shoto sat down.
So you know how you were complaining last week that nobody could get a hold of Jiran?
Izuku nodded.
I mean, now I'm pretty sure that he's been kidnapped if the fingers and the clothes that the police have been finding are any indication.
Bingo,
Shoto smiled. So, we're off in the mountains trying to let Shigaraki beat Gigantomachia, right?
Right, Izuku nodded.
Well then, we got this call on Twice's phone from the people who kidnapped Jiran, giving us an hour to meet them in Deikai City if we wanted them to save him. When we showed up, they basically attacked us on sight to prove they were stronger. Not only is Feelgood Incorporated, but they've got Detternat, the leader of the Hearts and Mind Party, not to mention a handful of heroes. It was fucking crazy.
Seriously.
Izuku hummed thoughtfully and leaned his chin on his hands.
With such powerful backers, I'm surprised I hadn't heard of them.
Well, they haven't done anything hugely criminal yet, Shoto shrugged. Just some black market support items and stuff like that. They call themselves the, Shoto struggled for a moment. That's it. They call themselves the Meta Liberation Army.
Izuku's eyebrows shot up.
You mean like Destro? I thought that cult died out decades ago.
Shoto hit himself in the head.
That's what they were acting like. He laughed and put his feet up on the coffee table.
And I don't really know. I'd never heard of them before. I think their leader called himself Re-Destro, though.
So basically, Izuku hummed, this Meta Liberation Army tried to challenge the League in order to assert their dominance. Considering you're here, I take it they lost.
Shoto nodded eagerly.
Yep. Oh, and your theory on Twice needing to be injured to overcome his psychological trauma was correct, by the way. We probably wouldn't have made it out alive if he didn't turn the tide by cloning himself. Well, that and Gigantomachia showing up to try to fight Shigaraki again. As it was, Toga was pretty badly injured, but the doctor treated her wounds and she'll probably have a few scars, but that said she'll make a full recovery. Izuku clenched his fists. Were you injured, Shoto? Shoto wrapped him in a hug. Don't worry about me, I'm fine. They tried to kill you. And you said for yourself they hurt Himiko. What if they killed her? I don't have that many friends, Shoto. Izuku's voice cracked. I can't afford to lose any of you. Yeah, Shoto said softly, but I'm strong, and so is Toga. We wouldn't be in the League if we couldn't defend ourselves and if we never go into battle alone. Dabi was there to protect me, and Twice protected Toga. We're okay. I should destroy them for hurting you guys, Izuku said darkly. We can take care of ourselves, Izuku. Shoto gave him a look. I mean, you can do what you want, but for right now, we won and they lost, and they agreed to give us access to their resources. And besides, Shoto shrugged, at this point we're basically just biding our time before stabbing them in the back, and they're gonna do the same to us. Izuku took a deep breath. Alright, I trust you. But if they try to hurt you again, they're dead, okay? Shoto nodded, smiling. Thanks, Izuku. Also, they want to meet you. They apparently already know who you are, since they're basically running a surveillance state behind the scenes, but they said they had some questions for you. Izuku looked at him skeptically. They have questions, or they have a job? Because those are two completely different things. Shoto shrugged and leaned back further into the couch. They didn't specify. I do know, though, that they aren't lacking in cash. They can afford even your ridiculous prices. Fine, Izuku huffed. I'll meet with them, but if I don't like them, I reserve the right to kill them. Shoto laughed and kissed him. I wouldn't expect anything less. Now, since your part of this conspiracy is proven true, I just need to find that undeniable evidence that Sansa was present in ancient Egypt. Kiego Takumi frowned as he looked in the mirror after his meeting with Dabi. He
begged the Hero Commission to pull him out after Endeavor's death, but they argued that he'd already laid the groundwork and that it was too late to send in anyone else. Kiego didn't think it was good for the number one hero to even pretend to be a villain after what happened to the last number one, but maybe he'd be able to catch a glimpse of Mastermind, or even identify him, considering his close relationship with the League. The latest JP Hero Billboard announcement has been tense, for the lack of a better word. After he'd been announced number one, the other heroes kept glancing at him like he'd been given a death sentence, which maybe he had. Hawks sighed and began washing his face. It was just so frustrating. The point of having popular heroes was to try to reassure the public, but with Mastermind on the loose, the more popular heroes were having the opposite effect. At the after party, there had been even more rumors that this would probably be the last JP announcement until Mastermind was safely behind bars, to avoid giving him more targets. Dabi had yet to introduce him to any other members of the League. Kiego hadn't even met Dabi's brother yet, though Tokuyami had mentioned Shoto a few times during his work study. Kiego dried his face off and scowled. To think that Endeavor really... He shook his head. It didn't matter. Endeavor may have been an inspiration to him, but he wasn't the reason he became a hero. My future as a hero? Or my future as your masterpiece? Either way, it's no great loss. I didn't ask for either one. Kiego pushed those thoughts out of his head and got ready for bed. No, he wasn't like Freezerburn. So what if neither of them had been given a choice when it came to their career path? He wanted to help people, not hurt them, so at the end of the day they weren't the same at all. Besides, growing up with the Hero Commission hadn't been that bad. Sure, it had been a lot of training, but it had all been worth it, hadn't it? Dabi had mentioned a new group that they were partnering with called the Meta Liberation Army. Kiego would have to look into them more tomorrow, see what they were about and what their ideals were. Hopefully, there was a weakness that the Hero Commission could exploit when the two groups came together. He didn't know what they'd do if the League didn't get taken down soon. The media was already tearing the Commission apart as it was. They couldn't afford any more failures. Duran jumped back when a loud bang sounded in the alley outside his office, and he froze for a solid minute before realizing it was just a cat that had knocked over a trash can. He shook his head. He'd heard that same sound hundreds of times during the decades he'd been in this office, so why was he getting so freaked out now? He grimaced as he finished adjusting the mechanical hand that he'd ordered and tried to flex his fingers. The hand moved sluggishly, giving Duran that feeling that everything was just slightly to the left of where it should be, and it hurt. As if having his fingers all removed one by one hadn't been bad enough, now he had to deal with pain every time he wanted to move his fake ones. His cell phone rang, and he tried to answer it, only to drop it as his mechanical hand refused to cooperate. He tore the hand off and threw it down on his desk in frustration, glaring at it for a long moment before using his left hand to answer the call. "Hey, Dragon, what can I do for you?" Duran tried to smirk like he usually did, but the expression slipped from his face almost immediately. "Glad to hear you're all right after your kidnapping, Duran. You had us worried there for a minute." Dragon's voice was harsh and somewhat gravelly, a side effect of his fire breath quirk. "I'm fine," Duran said, too quickly. "But you didn't call to inquire after my health." Dragon laughed. "You're right. Glad to see you haven't lost your head for business. I want you to set up a meeting with Mastermind." Duran sighed. "Like I told you the last 3 times you asked me, he refuses to work with you. Sorry, Dragon, but you should know better than to make Mastermind do something he doesn't want. Those who try are lucky if they only end up dead." "Why, I'm willing to pay his prices," Dragon yelled, and Duran knew he probably had literal smoke pouring from his nostrils. "I don't know why," Duran tried to rub at the bridge of his nose, only to realize at the last minute that he didn't have the fingers required for the action. "Look, he didn't tell me why he doesn't want to work with you, just that he won't, and I'm not going to go behind his back to set up a meeting. I value both of our lives far too much for that." On the other end of the line, Dragon huffed. "Fine, have it your way. But just let no Mastermind know he's not the only villain capable of holding a grudge." Dragon hung up abruptly, and Duran took a deep breath before putting the phone down and picking up his new hand again. Mastermind wasn't usually picky about who he worked with. Normally, even if he didn't like someone, he'd still meet with them if the payoff was right.
That's what made it so odd that he outright refused to meet with the dragon or his gang, the Dragon's Horde, no matter how much the man offered to pay him. When he'd asked, Mastermind had mentioned it was personal, but refused to explain anything more than that. Jiran shook his head. One thing was for certain. Whatever Dragon had done to piss Mastermind off, it had to have been big.